Good morning, everyone. Clint McLaughlin here, Midwest Market Management. I've got Riley Sykart on with me here today. It is Thursday, October 2nd. Combines are in full swing. Riley and I thought we'd take a few minutes here to kind of recap the 2025 growing season as opposed to doing a final weather outlook, as weather is really going to have minimal impacts on anything moving forward here in the U.S. aside from any potential storm damage or things of that nature. But certainly, Riley, I would think that by now, altering the yield at a national level seems unlikely. So I am really excited to go back. Boy, it's been what a year. We went from, the long-term analysts calling for the mega drought. Drought monitor maps were lit up all of last fall and through the winter. And then, boy, it was rain, delayed planning, prevent plant, replant again, more rain, followed by a late season flash drought in the eastern belt. I think we've seen it all this year. Now the drought monitor map's coming back to life. It's just, just another year, huh?
Yeah, and it went by quick. I feel like we were just back in March talking about how we wanted to start doing this, and be good to get into people's heads to look at it from a national yield perspective and not a narrow little focus on the local area. And it put a lot of time into doing this, and I feel like I've really enjoyed it, and we've helped out a lot of people too.
One of the things, Riley, you and I talk about it, everything in life is mindset, structure, and execution. And the problem is if you're a farmer and you're a producer and you go in, you just inherently want markets to go up, right? Like we all do, right? That's just a part of the game. But if we approach weather and grain marketing with a mindset that we're going to go in and we're going to look for the problems, and we already have assumed in our mind that trendline yield is the best that we can do. And ultimately, every time something bad happens anywhere, we automatically just start subtracting from trendline yield. If you approach weather with the mindset that you're looking for something bullish, you're going to find something bullish. If you approach it from the mindset that, ultimately I got to market my grain here, and it would be prudent to look at this from a national yield perspective, you change your mindset. The structure that we've put together here is by design. We are zoomed out looking at widespread, maps so that we're intentionally trying to not focus on the little isolated problem. So mindset, structure, execution really has its play in a grain marketing approach. So hope you tune in for a little bit more of that in the future.
Yep. I think with all that said, Clint, let's get into what I have for some maps here for our year in review here to start off October. First thing I do want to show, these 25 corn chart. We'll be referring back to this a couple times before we're finished with this, but weather and what happened with the markets, I'd say was pretty much went hand in hand, don't you think?
Yeah, they're very well correlated, as you're going to see here.
Yep. So starting out here in the month of April, looking at rainfall over the whole month. We walked in with a bit of a drought issue in that western belt, and east was right there with them. And pretty simple, we wanted rains, and in April we started getting them. The problem is they didn't stop. So I think a lot of planters were slowed down all over the country, especially as we look more into it, that southeastern region. A lot of planters were doing replant, I think not once but twice. So rainfall started off pretty slow. Temperatures during the month of April were a little bit cool, but it wasn't a really big issue. There weren't any reports up in the Dakotas of crops getting froze off after they were planted. nobody had any snow corn. So I think everything went all right there on the temperature side of things. But as we came into the year, end of April, drought monitor map, you can see that southeastern belt was already cleared up from any drought issues. But we saw Dakotas had a pretty substantial drought in 2024, and the map was still pretty lit up for Nebraska, South Dakota, even some areas in North Dakota. So pretty clear there what was going on, and starting to see some dryness there in that northern Illinois region that did persist for a little while. But moving over to the month of May.
It's just unreal. Yeah.
It just didn't quit raining for a lot of guys, and delayed planning, and everybody was getting fairly bullish during this time, as we'll see here in a second. But zooming in from end of April around Easter until mid-May, I mean, there was not a planning window open for good chunks of Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, and even down in wheat country, Texas, Oklahoma, areas that had 10 plus inches. I remember there were small areas that had over 14 in a span of a week. So a lot of people were really not getting planters rolling, getting a little nervous, and the market was responding to that too. If we're looking at that April to May timeframe, Clint, before the people were even starting to get really concerned, the fear was starting to drive up that market. And I know you got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fear of the unknown is really what pushes markets, and they're, we call them futures markets for a reason, and somewhat they predict the futures, and there was just a lot of concern about the rains coming, and when you're in the heart of that uncertainty as a producer, it's really, really difficult to do this. And this is where it helps working with somebody that wants to incorporate mindset, because you got to change your mindset, and you got to realize that when you as a producer are the most concerned about your crop and what's happening out there, that is generally your best selling opportunity right then and there. And that's what happened, is we just rallied right into that time period because of the fear of the unknown.
Yep, pretty clear there. And then I guess we're seeing some foreshadowing right now of what happened after. But
Yeah.
Moving on, temperatures in the month of May, pretty similar story. Started to heat up a little bit, but definitely no concern there for the month.
Yeah, and we forget about that portion of it. Now that you talk about that, Riley, I remember just here, everywhere in the U.S., but even here more so. It was so cool at this time of year. We just kept saying we need heat, we need heat. That was a very common theme that we were talking about. But again, the crop was progressing and doing its thing.
Yep, the guys that weren't planted yet said they needed heat to dry them out. Yeah, I do remember that. Now that you bring that up, a lot of guys were I don't want to say crying, but they were pleading to get some heat into the forecast to get stuff rolling.
Prayers were answered.
Yeah, prayers were answered. Looking at the drought monitor map here at the end of May, starting to see that northern Illinois area missed a lot of the rains during the month. So planning wise, they got a lot of stuff in the ground, but we talked about that for a couple of months, that region that is really heavy in crop production for corn and soybeans. And they were a little bit dry there. And looking towards the western belt, the Dakotas were starting to ease up a bit, but Nebraska was still extremely dry. There was a trend that didn't continue. The western belt very quickly got more rain than I think anybody was expecting. But heading into the month of June, there were starting to be some questions and some eyebrows being raised about drought, even though we did have so much rain in that southern region especially.
Well, and then the market gets sensitive to, we all know that the worst thing you can do is, be wet, 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 and then turn off hot and dry.
Yep. And I just accidentally clicked over first, but you can see this little really drought heavy area in Nebraska, and yep, that's gone. June came with more rainfall, I think, than anybody was expecting, and one of the heaviest amounts of rain that I think we've had in June in a long time. A lot of guys were struggling to get crops sprayed due to all the rainfall that just continued. And at this point, guys were really sick of seeing clouds and seeing rain. But at the time, we were also starting to see crops were coming through okay, and stuff was looking really good. And that's what the market was paying attention to. They're
Yeah,
not looking at the
absolutely.
small areas. They're looking at it from
And,
the national perspective.
and guys, this is something you need to take home. Betting against the U.S. farmer to not get it sprayed, not get it done, not get it in. Those are losing bets every time. And Chicago traders are, on these wet years, they are primed and ready to sell rallies because they ultimately know you will get it in the ground, you will get it sprayed, and you will persevere.
Yep. Then during the month of June, started to see temperatures really warm up, and that really helped perk the crop up. A lot of guys are saying during this June to July time frame that we were starting to hear whispers of this is going to be the best crop that we've ever had.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, everyone always thought that the trend line yield was the top, and this was the time we were all starting to talk about, well, maybe we can do above trend line. Maybe that 181 yield is too low and we could go up to that 185 plus range.
Yeah.
And there were starting to be whispers about it, but nobody was quite sure what was going to happen.
Well, and then
And
shortly thereafter, it became this is a very common theme. Once one person said 185, then the next firm's throwing out 186. Now it becomes a race to see who's willing to throw out the highest yield number. And that's absolutely where we went with that game this year.
it didn't help out any of the markets whatsoever. As like you said, it just every day we were coming in here and seeing, well, national yield's going to be 189 now.
Yeah.
Had some reports that were saying 191 to 192.
Yeah.
So it was a time where I don't want to say it was depressing, but there was a lot of guys that were getting really discouraged with what was going on.
It wasn't a very fun time period.
No, looking at July rainfall, state of Iowa had really heavy rain. Illinois, which during this time we were looking at that drought monitor map, northern Illinois needed some rain. This is when they started to get it. So that color started to ease up on that drought monitor map. But the one thing that did start to change here during the month of July in that western belt, Kansas had a lot of heat. We mentioned it multiple times on our weekly reports that the whole month of July and even the tail end of June, Kansas had areas that averaged over 90 degrees for the full month. So it was enough that we were starting to ask questions here of, is that taking away some yield and adding some crop stress? And I remember us talking about that quite a few times. So we were starting to have some doubts from a national perspective, not from the entire crop, but there was starting to be some regions that were raising some eyebrows.
Sure.
So looking at the drought monitor map for that month, I actually started to see some color in northern Kansas, which was a bit surprising. And stuff in Illinois, as they got rain, was starting to ease up. And then Nebraska, that region that was heavy red just 2 months before, completely out of drought, had more rain than they knew what to do with. And this was the full swing of, we were going to have the biggest crop we've ever had, getting close to the USDA releasing their first number on national yield, which came out in August. And as we all know, that number was pretty high. So this was the time where everybody was primed up. We were going to have a big crop. So moving over to the month of August, one thing's on my mind here. Everybody was getting rain except that eastern belt. Indiana, Ohio, southern Illinois, going a whole month where they got at best 1.5 to 1.75 inches of rain. Same thing in Missouri. You could see that pocket started to open up for the potential of a flash drought. So that was not yet a concern, but I think everybody, yourself, Clint, I remember you brought it to our attention that the potential was there for them to start having an issue if they didn't start getting rain, and it quickly came to fruition. So looking at temperatures, the one thing that did help them out, we weren't hot enough to cause big issues. You remember in the month of August, we went from a week in the low to mid 70s here in Iowa to the next week was in the 90s. So it was one side of the spectrum or the other. And overall, it made for a relatively cool month of August. I'd say the Dakotas, if you remember that Western belt, had more sustained heat than everybody else. But
and that brings me to a point that I want to talk about just quickly. But guys have been working with me for 10, 15 years now. They are accustomed to hearing if 85 is ideal, 93 is not hot, guys. And it's about mindset, and it's about avoiding the traps associated with headlines. And I get so sick and tired of seeing it's hot and dry in the headlines. And it's 92 degrees outside, guys. The 92 is not hot if 85 is ideal. So just something to think about moving forward to try to help program you a little bit. Another one I use is you can't kill a corn crop with hot or dry. You kind of got to have them both together at the same time. I know I've had some customers talk to me about, I tell them that, and it's something that sticks in their head when it starts getting warm out there, but they're still getting the rain.
Yep. You've beat that into my head a few times too. And I've thought about that more than once this year. We'd be starting to get dry, but temperatures would be in the high 80s, and we're going to be fine. You got to have both. You got to have both.
Yeah.
So that's not just customers. You got that beat into my head now. I've heard that enough times. But moving into September rainfall, one thing to note again, a lot of that eastern belt just continued getting fairly missed. So we're talking about a 2 to 3 month window now where they've only had 2 inches of rain.
Yeah. And these maps are after the fact. You got to remember that this is the whole month put together. When we were looking at this in live time, there were some big goose eggs in that rain zone,
There was 2-week forecast with nothing.
Yeah.
So that was, we were starting to raise more eyebrows, especially here in this last month, that national yield was starting to drop, and a lot of areas were starting to get worried. The month of August and September, we really had the big issue of southern rust that started creeping into guys' minds. And a lot of people were in a mad scramble to get fungicide done because it came in, and it came in hard. And as we're sitting here on October 2nd, combines are rolling, there was definitely a yield effect.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see where we end up this year nationally. And, we'll be able to get a better grip on it, Riley, when we see a lot of our own customers' yields and compare them to county yields and things of that nature to see just how impactful this was. But again, that brings us back to the point of, the hardest part with watching weather and trying to, predict or assess national yield potential is the whole time you're sitting there saying, we're taking away yield. Absolutely. Right now, we are losing yield due to this. The question is using yield from where? And if we put this thing at a 185 national yield, can you imagine what this thing would have been, Riley, without the southern rust? Holy buckets. The 192 and 194 guys might have been onto something.
It would have been it would have been a big question as to how, it would have been pretty close to a perfect year for a lot of guys, unless you were caught in that bad planning area in the month of May. So getting rain through the year, enough heat to keep the crop moving, it would have been the perfect storm to see how good yields can be when everything goes right.
Yeah, we could have had a new benchmark, but maybe next year.
Well, I think that kind of comes with mixed feelings from farmers. They want themselves to have that best yield.
Yeah.
But that national yield can stay down in that 175 to 180 camp. So, but wrapping up September here, one thing to note, really warm in the month of September, not usually seeing temps averaging in the high 70s up in the northern belt. So a lot of crops, we've been mentioning that over the last 10 days as we were still doing our weekly reports. Grains dried down really quickly, similar to last year. Locally here, beans have gone from 14% to sub 10% in less than 5 days. So will it have an effect on national yield? Well, looking at what happened last year, I'd say it could, but I don't think it's going to be an impact. We're not going to take beans from a 53 and change that USDA currently has and bring it down to a 48. I don't see that potential there, but I think there is some yield loss going on right now, Clint.
Yeah, and from the weight, from the shatter, from corn. I mean, your test weight's going to be an issue. I personally think that the 200 million bushels missing off the quarterly stocks report had a lot to do with heavy test weights. And guys thought they had 50,000 bushel in the bin, and they did not have 50,000 bushel. They had 56,000 or 52,000, whatever the math may come up to. But test weights were very high last year, and I think that has something to do with the ending stock or the quarterly stocks report being off. And this year, it's potential that we see the opposite, where if test weights are a little bit lighter, that these guys think there's 50,000 in the bin, and there's ultimately 47,000 or 48,000 in the bin. So. We'll see how that shakes out. But this, from a national yield perspective, Riley, I think this actually could be something. Is it going to be something that alters us in a magnificent way? No, but it might be something that comes off the bushels later.
I think the one other thing to mention here is we're getting close to wrapping this up is the amount of acres that we had this year, especially on the corn side, was substantial. We were looking at the most planted acres for corn since 1936. So it's an important number to think about in terms of how much corn is going to be out there this year.
And that just brings me to another point, Riley. You just get these things you get to talking about, what was all the rhetoric early in the year? Yeah, we're going to have a lot of corn acres. We're going to have a lot of corn acres, but that means we won't be able to have a big yield because so many acres are going into the fringe area. Well, I think we need to turn 2025 into the poster child that is an inaccurate statement. And while, yes, some years, if you get thrown bogus weather, could be a problem. But I think this year you're going to prove that you can plant a lot of acres and still have a good yield. So, again, don't be counting on that in March.
Yep, I agree. So, finishing out here today, final drought monitor map that just came out this morning. You and I have mentioned that Eastern Belt has really turned drier. If you're looking at Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, heading into next year, that's going to be where the questions are to start. But to wrap up this year, I think some issues were there for guys that didn't get any rain from basically the end of July all the way through until here we are today. There was some yield loss there, and I think for that reason, our national yield has came off of that high number. That corn, we were sitting at that 188, and we've already came down a couple bushel, and I wouldn't be surprised, Clint, to see that number come down. I know we're in a government shutdown again right now, so we're not going to get a WASDE report next week, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that national corn yield come down a little bit more from where we're sitting currently. And I would say that Eastern Belt's a big reason behind that.
The Eastern Belt and then the rest. So again, I know this is getting long here, guys, but I certainly appreciate you tuning in. It's been a fun year. I hope you enjoyed our commentaries on weather from a national yield perspective. And if you feel like it was beneficial for you to watch this from a national yield perspective. If you feel like it somehow shifted your mindset and helped you make some better decisions, I encourage you to give us a call, because this is how we try to interact with our clients and try to implement some mindset and some structure that ultimately leads to some better grain marketing decisions. So you can check us out at midwestmarketmanagement.com. Also, I would, big shout out to Marcus Weather Group and, their map formatting. I mean, in terms of accuracy of what's rain and what's not, certainly they're up there with everybody else. But the ability to lay out the maps in any way, shape, or form and get the exact data in the time windows that you want. Do you want to see average max temperature, average low, the average over there? I mean, you just can't find a better program. So appreciate it, Marcus Weather Groups. And thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll be on here shortly with South America weather. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
This material has been prepared by a sales or trading employee or agent of Midwest Market Management and is in the nature of a solicitation. This material is not a research report prepared by of Midwest Market Management Research Department. By accepting this communication, you agree that you are an experienced user of the futures markets, capable of making independent trading decisions, and agree that you are not and will not rely solely on this communication in making trading decisions. Distribution in some jurisdictions may be prohibited or restricted by law. Persons in possession of this communication indirectly should inform themselves about and observe any such prohibition or restrictions. To the extent that you have received this communication indirectly and solicitations are prohibited in your jurisdiction without registration, the market commentary in this communication should not be considered a solicitation. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance, whether actual or indicated by simulated historical tests of strategies, is not indicative of future results. Trading advice is based on information taken from trades and statistical services and other sources that of Midwest Market Management believes are reliable. We do not guarantee that such information is accurate or complete, and it should not be relied upon as such. Trading advice reflects our good faith judgment at a specific time and is subject to change without notice. There is no guarantee that the advice we give will result in profitable trades.